The first sound was a betrayal. It wasn't the dramatic, flatlining wail of cinema, but a small, stuttering hiccup in the otherwise steady rhythm of the ICU. A single, sharp beep from a ventilator, aberrant and ugly, sliced through the air. In the controlled symphony of St. 100 of beep sound, Jude's Metropolitan Hospital's intensive care UNITA place, orchestrated by the gentle hiss of oxygen, the steady pulse of monitors, and the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes, it was a sound as alarming as a skid on black ice. Nurse Ava Reyes's head snapped up. Her pen hovered over the chart she was annotating, the ink forming a tiny, dark pool as she froze. Across the gleaming, linoleum-floored expanse of the ICU, the display on ventilator 5 flickered, its green luminescence wavering like a candle in a draft. Tethered to that machine was Mrs. Eleanor Albright, 78 years old, her body as fragile as ancient parchment, her lungs surrendered to the precise mechanics of the machine that breathed for her. She was fighting a vicious bout of pneumonia, and the ventilator was the only thing standing between her and the abyss. "Vent 5 is dropping!" The voice was Dr. Ben Carter's, sharp with a familiar edge of adrenaline-laced frustration. Ben was young, his face still holding the earnest idealism of medical school, but his eyes held the weariness of a resident who had seen too many near misses born from institutional neglect. He was already moving, his worn sneakers squeaking a frantic tempo on the polished linoleum as he bolted towards bed 5. Ava was there a half-second behind him, her movements a study in contained urgency. Years of responding to codes that erupted from silence had stripped her of panic, leaving only a core of pure, focused efficiency. Her deep, steady brown eyes didn't just see the monitor, they dissected its data. The oxygen saturation level, the all-important SPADU, was plummeting. 92, 90, 88. The numbers descended like stones dropping into a deep well, each digit a silent scream for air. Overhead, the fluorescent lights, perpetually humming, buzzed violently and dimmed for a full 3 seconds. The entire unit was plunged into a sickly gray twilight before the light surged back, brighter than before. It was a symptom of the city's aging power grid, buckling under the strain of a relentless August heatwave. Deep in the hospital's sub-basement, a behemoth of a diesel generator, a relic from a bygone decade, would be grudgingly coughing to life. But in the critical seconds of the power lag, sensitive electronics like ventilators were left vulnerable. They would reboot, reset, or simply fail. "Manual bag now." Ava's voice was calm, a solid anchor in the rising tide of chaos. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an imperative. Ben, anticipating the order, already had the blue ambu bag in his hands, tearing it from its plastic wrapper. With practiced movements, he disconnected the ventilator's primary tube from Mrs. Price, Albright's endotracheal tube, and fitted the ambu's mask over the connection. They fell into a life-saving, unspoken rhythm. Ava's eyes were locked on the monitor, her mind calculating, assessing. Ben's hands became the patient's lungs. He squeezed the bag with a steady, practiced pressure account of 1001, 1002, 1003, release. The soft whoosh of air was the only sound that mattered in that moment. Around them, other alarms, triggered by the power dip, began to shriek, adding to the cacophony. A feeding pump in bed 7 went silent. The monitor at bed 9, belonging to a post-op cardiac patient, began to wail about an arrhythmia caused by the brief electrical jolt. They were all distractions. Ava and Ben's universe had shrunk to the space around bed 5, to the falling numbers on the screen and the gentle, artificial rise and fall of an elderly woman's chest. 20 seconds. The monitor read 85%. Mrs. Albright's skin, usually a pale rose, had taken on a faint, dusky hue. A younger, healthier patient might tolerate this dip. For Mrs. Albright, whose reserves were already depleted, it was a critical assault. Come on," Ben muttered through clenched teeth, his knuckles white as he squeezed the bag again. "Breathe, Eleanor." 30 seconds. The ventilator, having completed its sluggish, infuriatingly slow reboot sequence, finally whirred back to life with a pneumatic sigh. Its screen blinked, then stabilized, its familiar green waveform resuming its steady march across the display. Ben expertly reconnected the tubing. Ava watched the monitor, her body rigid, not allowing herself to breathe until the numbers began to climb. 88, 91, 94, 96. The dusky hue receded from Mrs. Albright's cheeks. The immediate crisis had passed. Ava finally allowed herself to take a breath, straightening up. A single bead of sweat traced a path down her temple. The relief that washed through her was cold and thin, quickly evaporated by the heat of a familiar, simmering anger. This wasn't an act of God. This wasn't an unavoidable complication. This was negligence, codified in budget reports and deferred maintenance orders. It was the fourth time this week a power flicker had directly compromised a patient's life. And it was only Tuesday. Later that night, the clock on the break room wall showing 2:17 a.m., the air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and the low hum of the vending machine. Ava stared into the murky depths of her styrofoam cup, the bitter liquid, a punishment she felt she deserved for her own powerlessness. The adrenaline from the incident with Mrs. Albright had long since ebbed away, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a raw, chafed anger. Ben sat across from her, mechanically stirring a cup of tea he hadn't touched. His youthful face looked haggard under the harsh fluorescent lights. Maria Flores, a 60-year-old nurse whose calm demeanor was the bedrock of their night shift, sat beside Ava. Maria's hands, though wrinkled, were steady as she methodically peeled an orange, but the deep furrow in her brow betrayed her anxiety. "We got lucky," Ben said finally, his voice flat and devoid of triumph. 30 seconds is an eternity for a brain without oxygen. Another 10 seconds, and we wouldn't just be charting an incident, we'd be calling a code, or worse, explaining a neurological event to her family. Maria sighed, placing a perfect orange segment on a napkin. The scent of citrus barely cut through the room's stale air. "They have to fix that damn generator. They just have to. Or at least approve the funds for a dedicated backup for us. We're a powder keg of compromised patients. We're the most vulnerable unit in this entire hospital." Ben let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "I asked Linda in accounting about it yesterday, just casually. She told me the grant application for a new ICU backup system was denied. Again. It wasn't deemed a critical priority for this fiscal year." "Not a critical priority?" Ben's voice rose, cracking with disbelief. "What precisely is more critical than the machinery that keeps the sickest people in this city alive? Do they know what we do up here?" I passed the lobby on my way in. "They're installing a new water feature. A waterfall. A goddamn waterfall. Don't forget the touchscreen interactive maps," Maria added, her tone laced with a cynicism honed over 3 decades of service at St. Jude's. "It's always the same story. Image over substance. Keep the board of directors and the wealthy donors happy with a pretty facade." Meanwhile, upstairs, we're holding the place together with duct tape and prayer. Ava had remained silent, her gaze fixed on the chipped Formica tabletop. The conversation was a loop, a tired, hopeless refrain they had recited 100 times before. But tonight, the words felt different. They felt like an indictment. The near miss with Mrs. Albright hadn't been a spark on dry tinder. It had been a lit match tossed on a puddle of gasoline. "The ICU's dedicated backup unit has been non-functional for 184 days, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it had a strange, resonant quality that cut through the men's frustration. Both of them turned to look at her. "I check the maintenance logs every week," she continued, her gaze distant. "The part we need is a simple transfer switch. It costs about $900, but it's on backorder. The official status is indefinite, which is administrative code for it's never coming. They're letting the system die of neglect so they can justify a full, multi-million-dollar overhaul in 5 years instead of spending a few thousand on repairs now." She finally looked up, her brown eyes, usually so full of compassion, now hard as flint. "We are flying without a net. A serious outage. A summer thunderstorm that knocks out a substation. Anything that takes the main grid down for more than a few minutes. We would be bagging every patient in the unit simultaneously. We have 4 nurses and 1 resident on tonight for 16 beds, 12 of which are occupied. We don't have the staff for that. We don't have enough hands. People would die. It is not a possibility. It is a mathematical certainty." The stark, unvarnished truth of her words landed in the center of the table like a lead weight. This wasn't just complaining about their jobs anymore. This was a diagnosis of a terminal illness. And they were the only doctors in the room. Ava pushed her chair back, the scraping sound loud in the tense silence. "I'm going to do something about it." Maria looked at her, her expression a mixture of fear and admiration. "Ava, be careful. You know what happens to people who rock the boat." "I'd rather rock the boat," Ava said, her voice low and fierce, "than watch it sink with all my patients on board." Sleep was not a refuge that night. It was a haunted house. Every time Ava closed her eyes, the ghost of her brother Leo was waiting for her. She was 17 again, standing in the dingy, puke-green hallway of a small, underfunded rural hospital. The smell of stale disinfectant, bleach, and a coppery tang of blood. Leo, her vibrant, wisecracking little brother, the star of his soccer team, had collapsed on the field. An undiagnosed congenital heart defect, a ticking time bomb no one had heard. The memory was a collage of sensory tortures. The frantic, shouted medical jargon she barely understood. The sight of a doctor, his face pale and slick with sweat, pounding on Leo's chest. The terrible, whining sound of a defibrillator struggling to hold a charge. "It's not working," the doctor had yelled, his voice raw with panic. "The battery's shot! Get me the other one!" And the reply from a nurse, a woman whose face Ava could never recall but whose voice was etched into her soul, choked with a sob. "That's the only one we have." That voice was the ghost that lived in the machinery of Ava's life. It was in the rhythmic beep of every heart monitor, the hiss of every ventilator. It was the silent, driving force behind her meticulous care, her fierce advocacy, her intolerance for cutting corners. She would not stand by and watch that ghost claim another victim. Not on her watch. Ava threw back the covers and walked to her small desk, the glow of her laptop screen chasing the shadows from her face. Her fingers, usually so gentle and precise as they checked a pulse or adjusted an IV line, now flew across the keyboard with a frantic intensity. Hospital-grade portable generator. Continuous power supply for ICU. Medical equipment power requirements. NEMA Li 1430 versus Livin 2130 receptacles. She dove headfirst into a world of technical specifications, power ratings, and fuel consumption rates. She learned the difference between standby, prime, and continuous power. She read dense PDF manuals and watched dry instructional videos made by bearded men in dusty workshops. She armed herself with knowledge, building an arsenal of facts. After 3 hours, she found it. On a surplus equipment website based in Ohio, nestled between a used forklift and a commercial ice machine, was a diesel-powered, trailer-mountable generator. It was an Onan, an older model but a workhorse, known for its reliability. It had enough wattage, continuous 20-quidal power every single piece of critical equipment in her 16-bed ICU, with power to spare for the lights and the nursing station. It was a fortress against the darkness. Then she scrolled down and saw the price, $8,250. Her breath caught in her throat. The number seemed to mock her. She opened a new browser tab and logged into her bank account. Her checking account held $142. Her savings account, the result of a decade of squirreled-away overtime pay and frugal living, held $6,950. It wasn't enough. Her gaze drifted to the window, down to the dark street where her car, a loyal 2013 Honda Civic, sat parked under a street lamp. It was paid off. It was the single most valuable thing she owned. It was her freedom. The ability to drive to the coast on a rare weekend off, to feel the salt spray on her face, to wash the smell of sickness and antiseptic from her soul. The thought of selling it felt like a physical amputation. But then she pictured the ICU. She saw Mrs. Albright's face, pale and trusting. She saw Mr. Chen in bed 9, a retired schoolteacher who was finally stable after a brutal open-heart surgery. She saw the terrified, exhausted faces of the family members in the waiting room, who had entrusted the most precious people in their lives to Ava and her colleagues, to a system that was failing them all. And she saw Leo, his bright, vibrant life extinguished by a dead battery and a budget shortfall. The decision was not a choice. It was a conclusion. It was the only possible answer to the equation of life and death she had been solving in her head all night. The used car dealership smelled of stale coffee, tire rubber, and desperation. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile, unflattering glow on the rows of gleaming cars. Ava felt utterly out of place. The salesman, a portly man named Stan, with a practiced, ingratiating smile, circled her Civic. He ran a hand over the hood, peered into the clean interior, and kicked a tire with theatrical flair. "It's a clean car, I'll give you that," he said, making a note on his clipboard. "You're the original owner?" "Yes," Ava replied, her voice tight. "Regular oil changes? Kept up with the maintenance?" "Meticulously." She thought of the Saturdays spent at the garage, the careful record she kept in a folder in her glove compartment. That car wasn't just transport. It was a responsibility she had taken seriously. Stan grunted, and retired to his glass-walled office. Ava waited, her stomach churning. She watched families wander the lot, looking at minivans, young couples excitedly pointing at sporty coupes. For them, this was a place of beginnings, of new journeys. For her, it was a place of endings. Stan returned, his smile slightly diminished. Okay, here's the thing. It's a 12-year-old sedan. Reliable, sure, but the market's flooded. Best I can do for you, today only, is $7,800. $7,800. It was less than she'd hoped, but it would be enough, barely. She added it to the money in her savings. It would cover the generator and the delivery fee. Nothing would be left over. She looked out the window at her car one last time. She remembered driving it home from the dealership a decade ago. The new car smelled a heady perfume of independence. She remembered road trips to the coast, the windows down, music blasting. She remembered driving a terrified stray dog to the emergency vet during a thunderstorm. She remembered picking up Maria after her husband's funeral, the two of them just sitting in the car in silence for an hour because there were no words. The car wasn't just metal and plastic. It was a vessel for her life. "Ma'am?" Stan prompted, holding out a pen. "We got a deal?" Ava took a deep breath, the smell of cheap air freshener filling her lungs. She thought of the steady, rhythmic whoosh of a ventilator, the price of a heartbeat. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady as she took the pen. "We have a deal." She walked out of the dealership an hour later, a cashier's check for $7,800 clutched in her hand. The keys to her Civic were gone. As she walked to the bus stop, the city felt larger, louder, and more intimidating than it had that morning. The sacrifice was now real, tangible, a hollow space in her life where her car used to be. But as she transferred the funds to the surplus equipment company via her phone, a different feeling began to take root, not regret, but a fierce, unyielding sense of purpose. The generator would be delivered in 2 days. Part 2. The Unsanctioned Solution. 2 days later, a hulking olive-green machine sat on a wooden pallet at the edge of St. Jude's loading dock, smelling faintly of diesel and fresh paint. Ava stood beside it, her heart pounding with a nervous, triumphant energy. She had spent the last 48 hours on edge, tracking the shipment, coordinating the delivery time, and taking a personal day from the hospital to ensure she was there to receive it. Dr. Carter, true to his word, was there with her, his sleeves rolled up. He had managed to enlist the help of 2 maintenance workers, Gus and Sal, 2 grizzled hospital veterans who had seen it all and held a deep, quiet respect for the ICU nurses. "Holy Moses, Ava," Gus said, whistling as he circled the generator. "You weren't kidding. That's a serious piece of kit." "It's our new insurance policy," Ava replied, a small, determined smile on her face. "Where does the administration think this came from?" Ben asked in a low voice, looking around nervously. "They don't know it's here," Ava said calmly. "And with any luck, they won't until it's installed and ready to go. I've already spoken to a certified electrician, friend of my cousin's, who's willing to come in this weekend and hook it up properly." "You've thought of everything," Ben said, a look of admiration on his face. "I had to." With a series of grunts and coordinated heaves, the 4 of them managed to wrestle the heavy machine off the pallet and onto a heavy-duty dolly. They began the slow, arduous process of wheeling it towards the ICU's rear service entrance, its iron wheels protesting on the uneven concrete. There was a palpable sense of clandestine excitement among them, the thrill of a secret mission, of taking control in a system that had left them feeling powerless for so long. They were a small band of rebels, fighting for their patients in the only way they knew how. Each rotation of the wheels felt like a small victory against the institutional neglect they battled every day. They had almost made it to the service corridor, a mere 50 feet from the relative safety of the ICU's back entrance, when a sharp, imperious voice sliced through their triumphant mood. "What in God's name is going on here?" Carl Davies, the hospital risk management operations director, stood before them like an immaculately dressed specter of doom. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his gray suit was pristine, and his polished black shoes seemed to mock the grimy floor of the loading dock. He was a man who thrived on order, predictability, and protocols, and the sight of a senior nurse, a resident doctor, and 2 maintenance men wheeling a piece of industrial machinery through his hospital was an affront to his entire worldview. His eyes, small and hard, narrowed as they took in the scene. He had been on his way to a luncheon and had taken a shortcut through the back corridors when he'd been alerted by a frantic call from a security guard about an unauthorized heavy equipment delivery. Nurse Reyes, he said, his voice dangerously calm, his gaze locking onto Ava. Perhaps you would care to explain this unsanctioned parade? Ava felt a jolt of adrenaline, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind. She straightened her back and met his gaze without flinching. Mr. Davies, this is a portable backup generator for the intensive care unit. A generator, Davies repeated, the words dripping with disbelief. I am aware of what it is. What I am not aware of is any purchase order, any safety assessment, any installation protocol, or any authorization whatsoever for this thing. He gestured dismissively at the generator as if it were a piece of garbage. Our unit's dedicated backup has been non-functional for over 6 months, Mr. Davies, Ava explained, her voice even and steady, betraying none of the frantic pounding in her chest. The main hospital generator has proven unreliable during peak loads. We had another incident just a few days ago. Patient safety was compromised. This is the solution. Davies' face, already stern, hardened into a mask of cold fury. Patient safety? He scoffed, taking a step closer. The scent of his expensive cologne was jarring in the industrial air of the loading dock. You think bringing a piece of uncertified, untested, black market hardware onto hospital property is your definition of patient safety? Do you have any conception of the liability you have just single-handedly created? The insurance implications? The city codes you are violating at this very moment? He turned his glare on Ben, Gus, and Sal. And you are all abetting this madness! Gus and Sal shuffled their feet, suddenly looking very interested in the cracks in the concrete. Ben, however, stepped forward. Sir, with all due respect, Ava is right. We almost lost a patient. This is a necessary precaution. Davies waved a dismissive hand at him. Dr. Carter, your idealism is as touching as it is naive. This isn't a university debate club. It's a multi-million-dollar healthcare facility with stringent regulations. Regulations that, I might add, exist to prevent the very kind of catastrophic failure this rogue device could cause. He jabbed a finger towards the generator. Where did you even get the funds for this? The question hung in the air. Ava took a breath. I bought it. The silence that followed was profound. Davies stared at her, his mouth slightly agape, as if she had just confessed to performing surgery with kitchen utensils. You bought it? An ICU nurse bought a piece of industrial hardware? I used my own money, Ava said, her chin held high. I sold my car. The revelation seemed to momentarily break through Davies' wall of bureaucratic rage, replaced by sheer, unadulterated astonishment. He looked from Ava's determined face to the massive green generator and back again. He ran a hand over his perfect hair, a gesture of profound bewilderment. You sold your car, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the absurdity of the words. To buy a generator, without authorization, without consultation, without any regard for the chain of command or established hospital procedure. He shook his head, a humorless, disbelieving laugh escaping his lips. This is beyond anything I have ever encountered in my 25 years of hospital administration. His brief moment of shock quickly curdled back into anger, now colder and more focused. This stops now, he declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. This generator is not to be moved another inch. It is not to be connected. It is to be removed from hospital property immediately. This entire incident will be investigated, and I assure you, Nurse Reyes, there will be consequences. And what if the power goes out tonight, Mr. Davies? Ava asked, her voice low but laced with steel. What will the consequences be then? Davies' eyes narrowed into slits. That, Nurse Reyes, is a risk I am willing to take. It is a far more manageable risk than the one you have so recklessly created here today. The confrontation escalated in Davies' sterile, modern office. Ava sat opposite him, the notice of violation form. He had just slapped on his polished desk a stark white accusation. He lectured her for what felt like hours, his voice a monotone drone reciting chapter and verse of hospital regulations, city ordinances, and insurance clauses. He spoke of unauthorized modifications to hospital infrastructure, breach of procurement protocol, and the unacceptable level of risk she had introduced. He seemed utterly incapable of grasping the fundamental reason behind her actions. To Carl Davies, this wasn't about saving lives. It was about maintaining order, adhering to rules, and protecting the institution from any potential negative repercussions. regardless of the human cost of inaction. Nurse Reyes, he concluded, his gaze cold and unforgiving, your actions have forced my hand. I have initiated a formal review of this incident. You are hereby forbidden from connecting or operating that generator. Furthermore, I have reported this to the city's Department of Buildings and Safety. They will be conducting a full inspection. So, what happens if the power goes out before then, Mr. Davies? Ava asked, her voice quiet but laced with a bitter irony. Do we just tell Mrs. Albright and the others that we're sorry, but we're waiting for the paperwork? Davies simply stared back at her, his expression unyielding. Protocol is protocol, Nurse Reyes. It exists for a reason. He then informed her that, pending the outcome of the review and the city inspection, she was being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. Her access badge was deactivated before she left his office. The weight of his words, the cold finality of his decision, settled heavily on Ava as she walked out of the hospital. She had tried to do the right thing, the only thing she could think of to protect her patients, and she had been met with nothing but bureaucratic brick walls and now professional punishment. The anger simmered beneath the surface, a slow burn that threatened to consume her. Unbeknownst to Ava and Davies, the seeds of the next act were already being sown in the digital realm. A disgruntled administrative assistant in Davies' office, someone who had overheard the heated hallway confrontation and felt a flicker of outrage at the director's dismissive attitude, decided to anonymously leak a heavily redacted internal memo about the incident to a local news blog known for its sensationalist headlines. The tip was brief and tantalizing. Nurse at St. Jude's buys equipment hospital refused to. Administration furious. Across town in the cluttered home office of Sharon Vance, a freelance online journalist whose digital footprint was more about clicks than credibility, the anonymous tip landed like a digital grenade. Sharon, a woman in her late 20s with an insatiable appetite for controversy, saw the potential for a viral story instantly. Hero nurse goes rogue? She muttered to herself, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Or reckless vigilante puts patients at risk? The ambiguity was gold. Sharon immediately went to work. She tried calling the hospital's PR line, but predictably, all she got was a curt no comment from Davies' office, which Sharon interpreted as a tacit admission of guilt. She then scoured social media, quickly finding Ava's public profiles. Pictures of a slightly battered but beloved Honda Civic, along with occasional heartfelt posts about the challenges and rewards of nursing, painted a picture, but not the one Sharon intended to create. Ignoring the human element, Sharon began crafting her narrative. She focused on the potential dangers of uncertified medical equipment, the importance of hospital regulations, and the potential for a well-meaning but misguided individual to cause irreparable harm. She found a few anonymous online forums where people claiming to be medical professionals speculated darkly about the risks of DIY healthcare solutions. These became her expert sources. The resulting article, which went live on Sharon's website the following morning, was a masterpiece of manipulative framing. Headline: Hero or Hazard? St. Jude's nurse goes rogue, buys dangerous black market generator, endangering patients. The piece painted Ava as an emotionally unstable individual who had bypassed safety protocols in a reckless and possibly ego-driven attempt to play the hero. It hinted at potential kickbacks from the generator supplier, a complete fabrication, and it quoted heavily from the anonymous online comments, twisting them to support her narrative of a rogue nurse endangering vulnerable patients. The constant power outages and the hospital's inaction were conveniently omitted. The article spread like wildfire through local social media channels. The comments section exploded with outrage, much of it directed at Ava. This is insane! She could kill someone! Why wasn't she fired immediately? Hospitals have rules for a reason. Sharon Vance watched the traffic to her site surge, a smug satisfaction growing within her. At St. Jude's, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Ava arrived for what she assumed would be another shift, only to be met by a palpable wave of whispers and sidelong glances. Some of her colleagues, like Ben and Maria, offered worried but supportive looks. Others kept their distance, clearly fearful of being associated with the controversy. Davies summoned her to his office again, his face a mask of barely controlled fury as he thrust a printed copy of Sharon's article across the desk. Look at this, Reyes. Look at the damage you've caused. This is a public relations disaster. The board is demanding answers. He informed her that the city inspectors, armed with Sharon's sensationalist report, were now expediting their visit. And, Adding insult to injury, several patients' family members, having read Sharon's article, were now demanding to know what dangerous equipment Ava had been planning to use. Ava felt a cold dread wash over her. Her attempt to help had backfired spectacularly, turning her into a pariah, a threat in the very place she had dedicated her life to serving. The isolation was crushing. Sitting in her now empty parking spot that evening, the bus ride home a stark reminder of her sacrifice, Ava felt a profound sense of defeat. The system had not only failed her patients but had now turned its full force against her. The rage that simmered within her was now laced with a deep, aching despair. Part 3. The Reckoning. The city inspectors arrived at St. Jude's the following morning, a somber duo accompanied by a uniformed police officer. Carl Davies greeted them with a tight, self-satisfied smile, ushering them towards the ICU service area where Ava's generator sat, still crated and silent. A large red "Notice of Violation" sticker plastered across its cardboard exterior. The inspectors, stern-faced and efficient, spoke in a language of codes and regulations, their pronouncements echoing Davies' earlier condemnations. Non-compliant with city electrical standards, lack of UL certification, potential fire hazard. The police officer, a young man with a bored expression, mostly observed, his presence adding an unspoken layer of official disapproval. Ava watched the proceedings from a distance, a hollow ache in her chest. The system, represented by these figures of authority, was confirming Davies' narrative, solidifying her position as a reckless rule-breaker. The interaction with the police officer was brief and impersonal. When Ava attempted to explain her reasoning to one of the inspectors, the officer simply said, his voice neutral, "Ma'am, we just have to let them do their inspection. They're just following procedure." His words, though not overtly hostile, underscored Ava's powerlessness against the machinery of bureaucracy. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in the sleek, modern headquarters of a major American automaker in Detroit, Jessica Chen, the head of community outreach, was in her morning strategy meeting. Her focus was abruptly diverted when a junior PR analyst hesitantly approached her, a tablet in hand. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice slightly nervous, "you might want to see this. It's trending locally." He showed her Sharon Vance's inflammatory article on one side of the screen and, on the other, a rapidly growing social media thread. This one was different. It had started with a simple, heartfelt post from a woman named Sarah Miller, whose elderly father was a long-term patient in Ava's ICU. Sarah's post described the constant power flickers, the fear in the patient's eyes, and the quiet competence of the nurses, especially one named Ava, who always seemed to hold everything together. Other posts quickly followed, echoing Sarah's sentiments. Patients' families shared their anxieties and praised the dedication of the ICU staff. Then, anonymously at first, but with increasing boldness, nurses from St. Jude's and even other local hospitals began to corroborate the stories of chronic infrastructure problems and administrative neglect. The hashtag #StandWithNurseAva was gaining momentum. Jessica Chen, a sharp, decisive woman with years of experience navigating the complex landscape of corporate image and public perception, immediately recognized the stark contrast between the two narratives. She saw a crisis for St. Jude's, a potential human tragedy averted by a selfless act, and a unique opportunity for her company to make a genuine difference. "Pull all available data on St. Jude's power grid reliability," she instructed her team. "Get me confirmation from the local utility company, and see if we have any existing community partnerships with that hospital." For the next few hours, Jessica was a whirlwind of focused energy. Her team confirmed the frequent power outages with the utility company's public records. A contact at another local hospital, speaking off the record, painted a damning picture of St. Jude's aging infrastructure and the administration's cost-cutting measures. Jessica even made a discreet call to the CEO of her own company, outlining the situation and her proposed course of action. The plan that began to form in Jessica's mind was bold and decisive, a direct counterpoint to the bureaucratic inertia that had ensnared Ava Reyes. It was a plan that would not only right a wrong but would also resonate deeply with the public, turning a potential PR nightmare for a hospital into a powerful story of corporate responsibility and human compassion. Meanwhile, Ava sat in her small apartment, the silence amplifying her feelings of isolation. The administrative leave felt like a heavy weight, a confirmation of her failure in the eyes of the system. She looked out at the empty parking spot, a pang of loss hitting her anew. The bus ride home had been a stark reminder of her diminished independence. Then, her phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. Hesitantly, she answered. "Miss Reyes?" a clear, confident voice said on the other end. "My name is Jessica Chen. I'm with leading American automaker. We've been following your story." Ava's heart skipped a beat. My story?" "Yes," Jessica continued, her tone warm but professional. "We've read about what you did at St. Jude's. The real story. The one about your dedication to your patients. And we believe heroes shouldn't have to take the bus." Ava was stunned into silence, her mind struggling to process the unexpected call. "Ms. Reyes?" Jessica prompted gently. "Are you still there?" "Yes," Ava managed, her voice barely a whisper. I don't understand." "We'd like to help," Jessica said simply. "We admire your courage and your selflessness. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow?" The next day, the scene outside St. Jude's Hospital was a chaotic ballet of news vans and flashing lights. Sharon Vance, ever the opportunist, was holding court with a local news crew, preparing a smug follow-up report on the reckless nurse and the ongoing safety investigation. Then, a low rumble announced the arrival of a large, branded car carrier, the name of Jessica Chen's automaker emblazoned on its side. The ramp slowly lowered, revealing a gleaming, brand-new, limited-edition SUV, its polished chrome glinting in the morning sun. Jessica Chen, sharp and composed in a tailored suit, stepped out, a confident smile on her face. She walked directly to the assembled media, her presence immediately commanding attention. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "My name is Jessica Chen, and I represent Automaker Name. We are here today because we were deeply moved by the story of a nurse at this hospital, a woman named Ava Reyes." Sharon Vance's smile faltered, her microphone dropping slightly. Carl Davies, alerted by the commotion, watched from his office window, his face paling as he realized the narrative was shifting dramatically. "We understand that Miss Reyes acted heroically, using her own resources to try and ensure the safety of her patients in the face of systemic challenges," Jessica continued, her gaze sweeping across the reporters. "We also understand that for her selfless act, she has faced scrutiny and even disciplinary action." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then, she gestured towards the gleaming SUV behind her. "Today, Automaker Name is proud to present this vehicle to Ms. Reyes, as a token of our appreciation for her extraordinary dedication. A true hero should not have to worry about transportation." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd, but Jessica wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she announced, her voice gaining strength, "we are also donating a brand new, state-of-the-art, hospital-grade backup generator to the ICU at St. Jude's. Our engineering team will oversee the installation to ensure it meets all safety standards and regulations." She turned, her gaze firm and direct, towards the hospital building. True power isn't just about horsepower or kilowatts. It's about the power of human compassion and the courage to do what's right, even when it's not easy. Ava Reyes understands that. At that moment, Dr. Ben Carter, whom Jessica's team had contacted earlier, emerged from the hospital with a bewildered Ava in tow. Ava's eyes widened in disbelief as she took in the scene. The news cameras, the gleaming SUV, Jessica Chen's unwavering gaze. Jessica stepped forward and extended a hand to Ava, a warm smile gracing her lips. "Miss Reyes, on behalf of everyone at Automaker Name, thank you for your service and your extraordinary heart." She then presented Ava with the keys to the SUV. Tears streamed down Ava's face, a mixture of shock, relief, and overwhelming vindication. The crowd of onlookers, which now included many grateful patients' families and supportive nurses, erupted in applause, their cheers washing over Ava like a wave of long-awaited recognition. Sharon Vance stood frozen, her microphone silent, her sensationalist narrative shattered in a single, stunning act of corporate kindness. Carl Davies remained at the window, a look of utter disbelief and dawning dread on his face. The unsanctioned heart had finally found its champion. Part 4. The Ripple Effect. The aftermath of Jessica Chen's dramatic intervention was swift and far-reaching. The donated generator was installed within days, a team of the automaker's engineers working around the clock to ensure it met all safety standards and was seamlessly integrated into the hospital's electrical system. The local news, now overwhelmingly sympathetic to Ava, ran stories highlighting her heroism and the automaker's generosity. Stand with Nurse Ava became a national trending topic, and Sharon Vance's blog, once a haven for sensationalism, was flooded with angry comments and links to accurate accounts of the story, effectively discrediting her earlier reporting. Carl Davies, facing intense pressure from the hospital board and a significant public backlash, was forced to issue a formal, albeit grudging, apology for the hospital's handling of the situation. Rumors of his impending resignation began to circulate within the hospital administration. A few weeks later, Ava found herself behind the wheel of her new SUV, the luxurious leather seats a stark contrast to the worn fabric of her old Civic. Maria sat beside her, a contented smile on her face as they drove home after a long shift. "Can you believe all this, Ava?" Maria said, shaking her head in wonder. "Just a few weeks ago?" "It feels like a lifetime ago," Ava admitted, still slightly overwhelmed by the whirlwind of events. The attention was intense, and navigating the sudden glare of the public spotlight was a new and sometimes uncomfortable experience. But beneath the surface, a sense of purpose was growing, stronger than anything she had felt before. She wasn't just a nurse fighting isolated battles anymore. She had become a symbol, an accidental advocate for patients and underfunded hospitals everywhere. Several months later, Ava found herself in a conference room at the automaker's headquarters in Detroit. Seated across from her were Jessica Chen and other senior executives. They were there to formally announce the launch of the Reyes Grant, a new foundation generously funded by the automaker. Its mission: to provide critical equipment grants to underfunded hospitals in both rural and urban communities. Ava had been invited to sit on the foundation's board, a position she accepted with a mixture of humility and determination. Her first act as a board member was to champion the application from the small, rural hospital where her brother Leo had died years ago, the memory of their outdated equipment still a raw wound. Life in the ICU eventually settled back into a semblance of routine, albeit one with a crucial difference. The new generator hummed quietly in the background, a silent guardian against the ever-present threat of power outages. One evening, during a particularly busy shift, a young, nervous nurse was monitoring a complex case when the lights flickered. A collective breath held in the unit. But this time, there was no agonizing delay, no frantic beeping of failing equipment. The new generator kicked in instantly, seamlessly, the monitors barely registering the interruption. The young nurse looked at Ava, her eyes wide with relief and a newfound understanding of the quiet battle Ava had fought. Ava simply offered a small, reassuring nod and continued her rounds, her focus, as always, entirely on the patient in need. The spectacle of the limited edition SUV and the dramatic press conference had faded from the daily news cycle. But the impact of Ava's unsanctioned act resonated deeply, a quiet testament to the enduring power of human compassion and the courage of a single heart to challenge a broken system. The heart of the matter, Ava knew, wasn't about headlines or heroism. It was about the steady rhythm of life, safeguarded by those who cared enough to fight for it. And now, thanks to one brave nurse and an unexpected act of corporate grace, that rhythm beat a little stronger in the intensive care unit at St. Jude's.